Boer versus Afrikaner? The identity debate explained. In South Africa today, especially among Afrikaans-speaking white communities, two words often come up in conversation about identity: Afrikaner and Boervolk. Sometimes they're used as if they mean the same thing. Other times, you'll hear people insist there's a big difference. For many, it's just a question of language or habit. But for others, it's about history, politics, and even destiny. I decided to research the subject, and with the help of some of our subscribers, I will try to answer these questions. What is the difference? Are all Afrikaners Boer? Are all Boer Afrikaners? And why does it matter? Before we look for answers, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Feel free to leave a comment or ask questions. Let's take a calm and honest look at both views, without trying to force a right or wrong answer. In the end, it's up to each reader or viewer to decide what makes the most sense for them. The roots of both the Afrikaner and Boervolk stories go back to the 1600s, when Dutch settlers arrived at the Cape. Over time, they were joined by French Huguenots and Germans. These European groups mixed and formed a new community in southern Africa. They spoke a form of Dutch that slowly became Afrikaans, and they developed their own culture, heavily influenced by Calvinist Christianity, hard farming life, and the African environment. By the 1700s and early 1800s, some of these settlers, especially the more independent-minded farmers known as trekboer, started moving inland. They didn't like the growing British influence in the Cape Colony and wanted freedom to live by their own laws. This led to the Great Trek of the 1830s and 1840s, when thousands of Boer trekkers headed north to escape colonial rule. Out of this movement, new Boer republics were born: the South African Republic, Transvaal, the Orange Free State, and smaller short-lived states. The people who built these republics and fought to defend them became known as the Boer or Boervolk, literally, the Boer people. After the Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1902, the Boers were defeated by the British, and their republics were absorbed into the British Empire. The war left deep scars, with thousands of civilians dying in concentration camps and farms being burned to the ground. In the decades that followed, a new idea started to grow: Afrikaner nationalism. Instead of being just Boer or Cape Dutch, the plan was to unite all Afrikaans-speaking white South Africans, rural and urban, Boer and non-Boer, into a single cultural and political identity, the Afrikaner. By the 1930s and 1940s, this Afrikaner identity became dominant. It had a strong religious and national character, with its own political parties, schools, churches, and even banks. In 1948, the Afrikaner-led National Party came to power and began the policy of apartheid, which shaped South Africa for nearly 50 years. To many people at the time, being Afrikaner simply meant being a white Afrikaans-speaking South African. The Boervolk was seen as part of this bigger group, a historical root of the modern Afrikaner nation. Not everyone agreed with this version of history. For some, especially descendants of the old Boer republics, the term Afrikaner felt like a political construction, something created by elites in the cities to smooth over deep differences between Boers and other Afrikaans speakers, especially those who had worked more closely with the British. These critics often see the Boervolk not just as a cultural group, but as a separate volk, or nation, with its own flag, history, and destiny. In their view, the Boer didn't fight and die in wars just to become part of a broader Afrikaner identity. They fought to be free and independent. They built republics with their own constitutions. They saw themselves as a unique people with a special calling. Some even argue that the term Afrikaner was a way to dilute Boer identity, especially after the trauma of the Anglo-Boer War, and to bring the Boer into line with broader South African politics. Today, things have changed. Afrikaans is still spoken widely across the country, not just by white people but by colored communities as well. The political power of the Afrikaners is long gone. The National Party no longer exists. The apartheid era is over. But identity hasn't gone away. In fact, questions of identity may matter more now than ever, especially for smaller cultural groups who feel left out of the Rainbow Nation story. For some, calling themselves Afrikaners feels comfortable. It links them to a shared culture, a language, a set of traditions, and a community of people who, despite the past, still have a place in South Africa's future. This group is generally more urban, more integrated into the new South Africa, and less interested in separatism or cultural purism. For others, especially those who call themselves Boer or Boervolk, the term Afrikaner has lost its meaning. They see themselves as a people under threat, culturally, politically, and even physically. They often live in rural areas, attend traditional churches, and hold to older customs. Some want a separate homeland, a Volksstaat, or at least some form of cultural self-rule. For them, the Boervolk isn't just part of history, it's alive, and still fighting to survive. There are also practical questions. For instance, should the descendants of old Cape Dutch families who never joined the Great Trek really be called Boer? And what about Afrikaans-speaking whites who support modern liberal values and reject the idea of a separate Boer identity? Where do they fit? The debate isn't just cultural, it's political too. Some Boervolk activists argue that, as a distinct nation, they have the right to self-determination under international law. They point to the example of the Kurds, the Basques, or the Scots. Others say this is unrealistic in South Africa's current political climate, and that such calls only cause division and tension. On the flip side, many Afrikaners argue that unity is strength. They say the time for internal divisions is over. If Afrikaners and Boer can't stand together, they'll be even more marginalized. These voices often call for cultural renewal, investment in Afrikaans education, and cooperation with other communities. For many young Afrikaans speakers, this whole debate might feel old-fashioned. Some are tired of identity politics and just want to be seen as South Africans. Others are rediscovering their roots, learning about the Boer War, the Great Trek, or traditional Afrikaans music and poetry, and finding pride in those stories. There's also a growing number of Afrikaans speakers who don't fit neatly into either category. They might enjoy the culture and language, but reject the old ideologies that used to come with them. They see themselves as global citizens, not locked into one version of the past. At the end of the day, the question of Afrikaner versus Boervolk isn't something that can be solved with a dictionary or a debate. It's personal. It's emotional. It's tied to family stories, church memories, language, pride, pain, and politics. Both terms have real meaning for the people who use them. And both have deep historical roots. The Afrikaner identity gave a scattered community political strength for nearly a century. The Boervolk identity reminds us of a fierce love for independence and a history of struggle. Some people might feel strongly that they are Boer, not Afrikaners. Others may feel the opposite. And some may say, why choose? I'm both. Or even, I'm just a South African who happens to speak Afrikaans. That's the beauty and the burden of history. It's never one story, and it never stops evolving. Whether you see yourself as Afrikaner, Boer, or simply Afrikaans, the real question is, what kind of future do you want to help build? One that honors the past but is still open to change? One where language and culture survive not through fear, but through creativity, education, and community? That's a choice each person must make for themselves. Thank you for watching. Join the discussion and leave a comment. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel to grow.